Hello, this is Samuel Stokes from samuelstokesmusic.com and also facebook.com/samuelstokesmusic. So we're doing the monthly music memes review. So what I'm going to do is go through all of the memes that I have posted on Facebook in the last month and explaining them. And the reason that I do this is because I post memes about a lot of different types of music and a lot of different styles. And in some cases, some of the memes may have some sort of cultural reference. And since I know that there are people from around the world that have subscribed to my Facebook page, that there may be some cultural references that don't translate very well, and depending on what type of musician you are, you may not understand some of the memes that maybe are about another instrument. So you might actually be knowledgeable about music and still not understand all of these because there's so much music out there, and these memes represent a lot of different types of music. So even if you are a musician, it's quite possible that some of these memes don't make 100% perfect sense to you. So we're going to go through them one by one for everything from last month, so from February of 2023, and I'll just explain them the best of my ability. So this one that I posted on February 4th, looks like we have a metal drummer holding a sign that says, "I keep hitting my drums when people are trying to tune." So this is an example of drummer shaming. So yeah, you see a lot of memes like this where a dog will be wearing a sign around their neck called, and it'll say something like, "I won't eat my expensive designer food, but I will eat my owner's slippers," or something like that. So it's like a little pet shaming thing. But in this case, the drummer is the one being shamed. And he says he's hitting his drums while people are trying to tune. If you've ever tried to tune an instrument when somebody is hitting drums, it's very difficult. If you're tuning or you're tuning your instrument by ear, it distracts you from hearing whether you're on pitch. And if you're trying to use a visual tuner, like an electronic tuner, where you're trying to see, it used to be an actual little needle that would move back and forth, and you would see if it was centered on pitch, if it was straight up, and it would go a little bit one way or the other, depending on whether it was sharp or flat. And now they're electronic usually, but it's the same sort of principle. And so when you hit those drums, that needle or whatever pops in different directions, and it's really hard to tell if you're hitting the center of the pitch on the electronic tuner. And so yeah, so the drummer keeps practicing, keeps beating around on his drums while other people are trying to tune. All right, so this one says, "Happy Les Mis Day 2/4/601." Okay, so if you're not familiar with the musical Les Miserables, this might take a little explanation. So Les Miserables is a musical based on the Victor Hugo novel Les Miserables, and it was a musical, a very famous musical. The music's by Claude Michel Schoenberg, and the original French text is by Alain Boublil. I can't remember who did the English translation, but most of us in America, at least, are more familiar with the English translation than we are the original. But it's about Jean Valjean, who was he was put into jail for stealing some bread. I'm sure he also did other things, but he was very poor, couldn't afford to survive, and so he stole some bread, got put into prison for 20 years or something like that. And his prisoner number that they branded on him was 24601, and that's the end of one of his big songs. He's talking, it's called "Who Am I?" He sings this song where he's saying, "Am I anything other than this name that I've created for my..." Oh, I'm sorry. Left out a little detail. He escaped prison, but he still has the brand with that number on his chest. But he has become the mayor of his town. He's turned his life around, become very successful. But now somebody else that apparently somehow has the same number branded on them, they think that he's the escaped Jean Valjean. Apparently he had, I don't know why he had, the other guy had 24601 on his chest, but maybe he was imprisoned at some other prison and released. But this other man has the same number on his chest, and they think that's the person that stole the bread and escaped prison. So they put him on trial, but then Jean Valjean, who was the one they were actually looking for, He had to come clean and say, "This is me, 24601." Um, Now, of course, this only works well in America, and I don't know what other I'm not sure which other countries do month first and then date. So for anybody in the rest of the world, you're probably looking for April 2nd at 6:01 rather. So it'd be the 2nd of April rather than February the 4th is how we read it in America usually. So it just depends on your date format whether 24601 falls on February or April. Okay, this one says we never called for a piano tuner. I know, kid. Your neighbors did. All right. So this is a very true concern when you have neighbors that are practicing a lot, or what I'm more familiar with actually is being a music major when you're in the practice rooms and you have somebody right next to you in the practice room, and they're playing on either an out of tune piano or their instrument's not in very good tune, or they're not playing with a good intonation. It can be very difficult. So yes, neighbors can suffer because of poor tuning. All right, this one says jazz is about the notes you don't play. He tells me, and now I lie awake at night, tormented, bombarded by the ceaseless, silent melodies. I am my own undoing. The quiet makes it louder. Thus I remain forever cursed by this knowledge. I am never not playing jazz. So yeah, that's kind of uh, taking that statement of jazz is about the notes you don't play to an unhealthy extreme. Probably sounds like it might be Edgar Allan Poe inspired. I'm not sure actually. I'm not sure if any of this is specifically a reference to anything, but you sort of see the idea that we're going at here. So yeah, when they say jazz is about the notes that you don't play, that has to do with the fact that that space is very important when you're doing a jazz solo. Um, One of the kind of the amateur or somebody who's young and learning how to play jazz, the tendency is to do too much. Doing a solo. And just never leaving any room to breathe. Okay, and sometimes you get long phrases like that in bop music and bebop music, but um, most of the time you want some breath in there. Ba da ba ba da 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 da. So sometimes leaving that space in there makes a much more fluid sounding line than just da 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 just going on forever. Just doesn't sound very jazzy really in the end of the day when you're never leaving any sort of breath. So that's where that phrase about jazz is about the notes you don't play. It's also about the notes that you play, though. It's a little bit of both. All right, this one says, when you learn 3 chords on guitar, I'm something of a musician myself. And if this isn't true, there are so many people out there that they spend a lot of money on a nice guitar, and that's about all they can do with it. Now, that's okay, though, because you can do a lot with 3 chords. If you're playing folk music, if you're playing even certain pop songs and rock or blues music, a lot of it is the 1 chord, the 4 chord, and the 5 chord. Okay, those are kind of the common music of popular styles, the common chords of many different popular styles. If you can get a 6 chord or a 2 chord in there, then you opened up yourself to a lot of different songs. There was some YouTube video, cannot think of what it was called right now, but it had a bunch of songs that had the 1, 6, 4, 5 pattern in them, and there are many of those, and they strung maybe 100 of them together. I'm not sure. It was a lot of them, and that was only scratching the surface because there's more. 1, 6, 4, 5 is a really common sort of cyclical pattern because 1 and 6 they share 2 of the same notes, so going from 1 to 6 is an easy way to get from 1 back in the harmonic progression to something a little more distant from 1, and then you can go through the circle of fifths. Actually, 6 would usually go to 2, but 4 is a substitute for 2, so you can go 1, 6, 4, 5, back to 1, and you can just follow that pattern, just going through that sequence over and over and over again if you want to. Some songs, that's all it is. It's those exact 4 chords over and over again. And so you can do a lot with very little sometimes, especially when you're talking about chords. Three's enough for a lot of songs. Four gets you exponentially more songs that you can play. You get a few more in your arsenal, and then you can play a lot of things. Now, here's a little interesting side note about this meme. A lot of people mistakenly think this is Steve Buscemi, which this particular shot, it does kind of look like Steve Buscemi. This is actually Willem Dafoe. It's from Spider-Man, the one from 2002. And he says, I'm something of a scientist myself. And he's talking to Peter Parker. I think it's before he becomes Spider-Man. It's been a while since I watched it. But yeah, that's Willem Dafoe, who usually I don't think looks like Steve Buscemi, but in this case he does kind of resemble him in that still shot right there. All right, this one says, this is called sheet music. You can show this to a lead guitar player to make them stop playing. Yeah, this one's a little mean. This is a low blow. But yes, a lot of guitar players in general, don't read music. Now, by no means do all of them not read music. Some do. But it depends a lot on the style of playing and the manner in which you learned how to play. It's actually really common to teach guitar by rote or by ear, a little bit of both. Kind of, you show someone where to put their fingers, and then, they just learn to find the notes, and it's sometimes a very intuitive process. With piano lessons, they are most commonly taught with sheet music in front of you. However, when you think about it, through most of human history, we didn't have sheet music around us all the time, right? It didn't actually exist, for most of human history, right? It's really only in about the last 1,000 years that we even had sheet music, and even when it first was around, not a lot of people knew how to read it, so it's even today, a lot of music is passed down through oral tradition, through teaching hands-on, showing somebody how to play, or teaching someone how to learn how to pick out notes by ear. Actually, as far as all of human history is concerned, that was the way that music was taught for 99% of human history. So really, when you think about it, sheet music's more of a modern invention. But yes, guitar players don't tend to read from sheet music. I actually personally have to deal with this sometimes, to my chagrin. That I play guitar well enough, that I can write out guitar parts for people to play. But what happens more than half of the time, if I have to transcribe guitar parts for somebody, they need it done in tab. So I've had to add the tablature, and then tablature is just lines below that you put below the regular sheet music. You usually have the treble clef with the notes on it, and then below that you would have these 6 lines that show the 6 strings of the guitar, and then you put numbers on each one of those strings to show which fret that you need your finger by on that string. And it's a bit tedious if you're doing it manually. I use Finale notation software, so you can actually copy and paste onto a tab staff, and it will automatically create the tablature for you. The problem is that it doesn't always find the most sensible way to do the tablature. For example, like when you have notes above the high E string, well, you could finger those all along the high E string, anything from E and above. But sometimes it makes sense that some of those notes, they're actually closer to finger them on the B string right next to it, rather than jumping from here to here on the high E string. But Finale doesn't automatically figure that out for you. You can sort of look at it and figure out where you want your hand to be positioned. You can say, for Finale, when you copy and paste this section, say nothing below the 6th fret, so that way you maintain your hand in a higher position, and then it will try to do it more correctly for you like that. All right, this next one says, Keith Richards waiting for the rest of the Rolling Stones to get old enough to start a band. So there's Keith Richards as a fairly young man there, and I suppose this is supposed to be the rest of the Rolling Stones right here on the bench. Now, interestingly enough, Keith Richards is not the oldest of the Rolling Stones of the core band. Of course, Charlie Watts passed away recently, but Mick Jagger is actually the oldest. and but they're within a year of each other. They were both born in 1943, but for some reason Keith Richards, I guess he appears to have been the one that has lived a harder life, and people are just amazed, that he's looked old for a while now. Could have something to do with the rock and roll lifestyle, but he's the one that gets memed the most, Keith Richards. All right. The other day at a thrift store, I bought an old record album called Sounds Wasps Make. When I got home and played it, I said to myself, this doesn't sound anything like wasp sounds. Then I realized I was playing the B side. Okay, that one's pretty corny. So records, which for you young folks, anybody that might be tuning in, those are those large discs. They're usually black. I guess they could be other colors too. But you put it on a record player, turntable, where the thing would spin around. You'd have a needle that was rubbing against the little ridges on there, creating the sound, and then it's amplified through the speakers. And you would usually call the top side the A side and the bottom side the B side. So when you flipped it over, you had the B side, right? So A and B. Sometimes when you have multiple records in one album, when you have separate discs, you'd have an A and B side, and a C and a D side, and an E and an F side. Sometimes they would label them like that, and that could be confusing, but that's how they went. All right, so this meme here says, it says, Bell, there goes the baker with his tray like always. And then the baker says, well, there goes Bell singing her daily mean song about us. And this is interesting. It's from Beauty and the Beast, the Disney cartoon version. Music by Alan Menken. And that song, Bell, is the opening song. And it's interesting because Bell is singing about how, everybody does the same thing every day here. It's so boring living in this little town. She wants a more interesting life. But then what's kind of funny about this meme, I thought it was funny when I read it, but when I thought about it, then like the majority of the song is actually the rest of the town singing about how strange and odd Belle is, and he's always dreaming and reading books and stuff, and so actually, I think it's a mean song, but it goes both ways. I think the rest of the town actually maybe gives it to her worse than she gives it to them. It's at least even, So either way, everybody's being a little mean and judgy about the other person. Okay, this one says, you know what I want the next Disney princess to be? An alto. And somebody responds, I feel this in my soul and also in my strained vocal cords. That is right. If you want to sing Disney princess songs, you better be a soprano. So for those that may not be vocal musicians, soprano is the highest voice part, typically sung by women, and then alto would be the next part down. So usually with women's voices, you have soprano and alto would be the lower of those. So if you're someone that has a naturally low voice, as in an alto, it's going to be hard to hit the high notes of those Disney princess songs because they're mostly written for sopranos. I mean, maybe all of them are written for sopranos. When you think of the real classic Disney like Snow White and Cinderella, I mean, some of those are sky high sopranos. I mean, they're way up in the atmosphere, in the stratosphere there. So yes, to have a Disney princess be an alto would be unusual and would be welcomed by many people. Yeah, many times as a music transcriber, I've had to transpose parts. Like I have to write in all of the notes of a piece of music into the computer, switch it to a different key so that an alto can sing it instead of a soprano. All right, this one's humorous. It says the Nothingizer NO-3. This pedal does absolutely nothing, but you need it anyway. So it looks like a Boss pedal, but they've just taped this on there, I guess. But Boss is a really common brand of guitar pedal. And if you've seen some really good rock guitarists and stuff like that, a lot of times they have an entire board covered with these pedals. And each one of the pedals has a different sort of effect that it can run. And I suppose we've gone to the extreme where we now need a pedal that does nothing. So, yeah, I don't know. I thought it was kind of humorous. All right. This one says, every gig is now about luring sailors to their death. Remember when it used to be about the music? So there's a good one. so, um, so yeah, these appear to be sirens. I assume that's what they're meant to be, right? From Greek mythology, the sirens would sing a song and lure sailors to their death. I'm not exactly sure what their motivation to do so was, but that's what they would do. That was their nature. That they would sing these beautiful songs, and the sailors would try to find them, and then they would lure them to their untimely demise. Um, and so this siren is saying, remember when it used to be about the music? And this is sort of a true to life thing for musicians that sometimes we have to take gigs that are purely practical and not necessarily artistically challenging or gratifying in an artistic way, because we have to play at banquets where a lot of times we're not being really listened to actively. We have to do things like playing at weddings and funerals. Now, as I say this, I'm not to say that those things are not meaningful, but sometimes you're playing for a service that don't even know the person, you didn't know the person, and sometimes you're fulfilling a function, but it's not necessarily specifically about being an artistic endeavor. It's functional, and it's an important function, but it's not necessarily all about the music and creating great music. It's just playing a lot of the same old tunes over and over again. So yeah, that's a reality. Now about luring sailors to their death, I guess it could that could be another thing. Um, okay, it says Rammstein guy asking his wife what she wants for breakfast. Says do hash browns, do hash browns sound good. All right, so this is if you're not familiar with Rammstein, they're a German rock band or hard rock band or something. And they had a hit in 1997 called Du hast mich, or Du hast mich, they pronounce it that way. You can do a hard K or a sh sound for the CH sound. I believe they do it Du hast mich, if I remember right. And it translates to You Hate Me. It's also a homophone for Du hast mich I think it's with two A's when it's You Have Me. Sounds the same. And so, from what I understand, they were playing off of that double meaning there, that it could be You Have Me or You Hate Me. The English translated version, they actually just say You Hate Me, so it doesn't, I guess, have the same subtext. Yeah, and then instead of Du hast mich, it's Du hash browns sound good. Right, so yeah. Right, this one says, I think we should stick to doing this with a piano. Yes, and if you haven't ever seen it before, a lot of times in old, I guess, lounge jazz music is what I think of, where you would have a pianist playing on a grand piano with the lid closed, so there'd be the lady and then the dress like laying seductively on top of it while singing. I've never seen it done in real life, but seen it in movies and stuff like that. It's kind of over the top. So in this case, instead of sitting on the piano or laying on the piano, they're doing it on the guitar, which obviously for many reasons would be more difficult. Now, all this being said, I also wouldn't suggest trying this on a grand piano, although the piano itself is heavy. Adding another 100 up or 200 or more pounds, I don't know, however much the person weighs, it might not be that safe, especially depending on how old the piano is. I wouldn't suggest really laying on top of any instrument. Okay, so family circus. What I like best about church is when the organ makes the whole place shake. And boy, it really can. Um, the organ, obviously, well, I'll just go ahead and tell you because maybe not everybody um, knows all about different musical instruments, but the organ is a large keyboard instrument. So it has manuals like the piano, which means the keyboard. It can have more than one. Usually has more than one. Sometimes it can have three or four or even more if it's a really giant one. Also has a pedal board, so you have keys on the floor that you play with your feet, and those low pedals use really long pipes. There are different size of pipes. I think they're typically 4 foot, 8 foot, 16 foot, and then the 32-foot pipes are the really big pipes. Those are the really low ones. And so when you have a 32-foot stop pull, the stops are the little knobs that you can pull on the organ to get different pipes engaged. And when you have those 32-foot ones, those are the lowest pitched ones, and they can actually shake the windows. You can rattle the windows in the church even while you're playing them. And so yeah, they really literally can make the foundation or the walls or the windows shake. And so that's very true to life. Now, most instruments that I've played on have been electronic ones, but if you got big enough speakers hooked up to those, you get the same effect. So, okay, this one says, "Why is Billy Joel's laundry still wet? He didn't start the dryer." Okay, now of course this is a reference to Billy Joel's hit "We Didn't Start the Fire" from his 1989 Stormfront album. I don't know why we're seeing scenes from Star Trek Voyager here, but I don't know. But anyway, that's the joke. First gig, 10th gig. Yeah, so there's a very big difference. First time you go out on a big gig, you might be really overzealous and be like, oh, I need 2 bass drums. We have at least 7 toms showing here, probably a floor tom hidden. So probably 8 toms or more. Have at least a snare drum and hi-hat here. You have a bunch of different cymbals. Can't really tell what all this stuff is. It looks like some little maybe bongo drums here or something. I don't know. It looks like multiple sets of them. Maybe there's some other kind of drum mounted up in the air. Yeah, cymbals all over this rack. And then the 10th gig has been reduced down to crash cymbal, ride cymbal, hi-hat, 1 mounted tom, 1 floor tom, a bass drum, and a snare drum. And this is a very realistic sort of thing because when you first start getting down to play, you're real excited about, oh yeah, I'm gonna get all of my different stuff, and then by the 10th gig, you realize, wow, it is a real hassle to carry all of that equipment, to transport it, and then to have to carry it. Sometimes when you're doing a gig, you have to enter through the back door, carry it up 2 flights of stairs and into the banquet hall, whatever. You decide that, hey, maybe I don't need to carry all this stuff. And so you get a little more practical about it. I know as a keyboardist, one of my first keyboard purchases was an 88 key weighted keyboard, so Roland RD600. And after a while, it became too much, to carry that thing around, especially playing a banquet gig where I'm not really actively being listened to most of the time. I started bringing my 61 key non-weighted XP10 Roland keyboard, and that for most jobs was perfectly sufficient. So there was no reason to bring, a very large keyboard and a very large amplifier. So yeah, you start to learn what you actually need to bring to the gig. Now, what all you would like to have. Now, if somebody was going to set it up for you, great. You're playing a church gig on piano or organ, you don't have to bring your stuff typically, so. Okay, this one says, for when you poke a hole in your tire. Ha 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 ha. So it looks like an accordion with some sort of tube here attached to the tire in order to inflate it. So yes, the accordion, of course, is it's a bellows instrument. Uses bellows to push air across these metal reeds, which creates the sound. It was invented in Germany in 1800s, and also polka music was invented near that region. It was really invented in Bohemia, but it was a music that was a dance form that was invented in Bohemia that was heard throughout Europe, and so. The instrument and the dance style are pretty intimately linked, and so in this case, somebody has attached the accordion and using the bellows to inflate a tire. I don't know that you could get that amount of pressure from an accordion bellows enough to inflate a tire. I don't know. I guess it depends on what material the accordion is made out of, but I feel like maybe they don't actually push that much pressure. I don't know if you have 35 pounds per square inch pushing through an accordion bellows. I'm actually not sure. Maybe somebody in the comments maybe can tell me that's a accordion expert. But yeah, this explains that one. Okay, this one says Mediocre Guitar Player Magazine. helping bad players get a little better since 1978. So that's humorous enough. I'll also read some of the titles here, which you may not be able to see very well. It says, The F chord myth. Is it even necessary? Yes, the F chord. One of my guitar player friends one time, an amateur guitar player, said there's a reason they call it the F chord. And I suppose maybe there is. So an F chord, um, it's one that's necessary. Like all chords, I guess, are necessary to, in some respect. But the F chord, since we play a lot of things in C major, the F chord is the 4 chord, and so you kind of need it for that. There's a lot of other reasons why you might need it. So it's a chord that we need to know how to finger. Really, a good guitar player really needs to be able to play all of the major chords, and if you're really good, you should be able to play it in all kinds of different positions and voicings as well. But the F chord, as far as just kind of first position on the guitar sort of thing, or half position, I don't remember what they call it on guitar. It is one of the harder ones to play because you either need to bring your finger straight across the entire, they call it a bar chord. You need to either use a bar chord where you take your index finger all the way across and press all of the keys down at the same time, and then you have to position 3 fingers in the appropriate places, or you can leave out the bass actually and finger it without barring it across the guitar. But either way, it's a little bit awkward. And so they say F chord, is it even necessary to have an F chord? This next title says, Demanding day jobs allow us to afford the expensive guitars we cannot play. And that ain't the truth. I've known some people that had really nice jobs with good salaries, good income, and buying really nice guitars, but not really playing them that much, or not really knowing how to play them that well. But they got a nice guitar, $2,000 or $3,000 instrument, and then or more, and then not really knowing what they're doing, just playing maybe a few little licks or whatever. It's okay, I guess. Everybody's got to have a hobby. But you could also have the same sort of hobby with a much less expensive guitar. So I don't know, just a suggestion. This next one says, why stuffing socks into your sound hole is not a good idea. I don't know if anybody actually does that, but the sound hole of the guitar, of course, is the hole right in the middle under the strings. I suppose you could stick socks in there to muffle the sound, and maybe you would want to do that. But it's not a good idea. I would say it's probably not a good idea, because then the sound is not really going to resonate very much. No point in having the big body of the guitar if you're not letting the strings resonate. All right, and then under that it says, Antsy McLean interview. The singer-songwriter explains what he thinks a capo does. Capo is a little thing that you put on the... I thought I had one here, but I don't. It's a little spring-loaded clamp that you put on the strings so that you can transpose the instrument, essentially, to put it in different keys. It doesn't always have to be spring-loaded. They have some that are just like a strap that you can put around. And then it says, and he discusses his relentless obscurity. Quote, there is great comfort in knowing I will never be a has-been. So, I don't know. Now, I'm not real familiar with Antsy McLean. I've been told I should listen to him, though. Yeah, if you're never famous, then you'll never really be a has-been because you never were in the first place, I guess, is the point there. All right, and then the final one here says, how to play quietly at home while everyone is sleeping or otherwise not wanting to hear you. So, yes, that's something that's a real life thing. If you're living with other people, or you're in an apartment and you have people on the other side, you have to figure out how can you play in a way that people are not going to hear you. Now, if you're an electric guitar player, you can play without plugging in, or you can play in headphones and probably not going to be heard. Acoustic guitar is a little harder to do. Actually, I don't really know how you could do that. And it shows my lack of knowledge in the subject. I do play some guitar, but I don't know if they have a mute for the guitar the way that they do for other orchestral string instruments. But anyway, yeah, sometimes you got to be able to play without bothering other people. Okay, us music teachers understand this one. It says, I've prepared this PowerPoint presentation to explain why I didn't have time to practice this week. Yes, it is amazing sometimes the in-depth explanations you'll have as to why, the excuses that you get for why someone, your student didn't practice this week. So I could almost imagine this happening. It's like, well, why do you waste all this time doing a presentation when you could have been spending that time practicing? Um, but yeah, you get all kinds of excuses, and sometimes they're really elaborate excuses. Like, wow, all the time it took you to think up that excuse, you could have just practiced. Okay, this one says, and you may find yourself behind the wheel of a large automobile, and you may find yourself in a beautiful house with a beautiful wife, and you may ask yourself, well, how did I get here? And you have a car which somehow is in the middle of this window that is not at ground level. So it makes you wonder, how in the world did that car vault up into that window? Maybe there's something in front. I don't know if there was something in front of the house that it would have vaulted on. It would have ramped it up so where it would go through the window. So yeah, how did he get there? It's a good question. I put on there a once in a lifetime occurrence. This is a reference to the Talking Heads song "Once in a Lifetime" from the year 1980, and that's just a direct quote from the song. It's kind of, the song is partially spoken word, and this part is all spoken by the kind of spoken in a semi musical way, rhythmically and with interesting inflection and stuff like that. But that's an actual quote. And yes, how did you get your car and that automobile into that house like that? I don't know if the wife was in the house or if the wife was in the car. I hope nobody was hurt in the incident that created this interesting meme. Okay, and the final one for the month of February. It says, there's a party next door, but judging by the mix of late 90s, early 2000s jams, they'll wrap it up by 10. Yes. When you're with a group of people that are around your age, you tend to listen to the music that you grew up with. So in your teens and 20s usually is what you're listening to. So people with the 90s and 2000s, early 2000s music, they were probably, born in the 80s, and then you kind of grew up during the 90s and 2000s. And so those people are going to be probably near 40 or after 40. So yeah, they may not stay up quite so late. They're getting a little old at this point. Now this is not always true though. I played when I was in the early 2000s. I was playing with a group of older men that had a little group that played jazz standards, and they also played 50s pop songs and things like that. And and I was brought in as a substitute keyboardist a few times. And we played at a class reunion. I can't remember. I think it was it was maybe a 40th or 50th class reunion. So you're talking about, somewhere in the 50s or early 60s. And these people were pretty well jamming. I think we were there until near midnight playing that gig. And actually, the guys in the band said the previous week they'd been at some, I can't remember what it was, maybe like a 60th class reunion or something like that. And they said that those folks were partying all week. So I think it just depends on the personalities and maybe who's in charge of the whole shindig as to what you're going to get with something like that. But anyway, that's the memes for the past month. I will be back in about a month to do next month worth of memes. So I hope you enjoyed it. And if you have any questions, always just leave them in the comments. Either of this video or any day that I post a meme. Facebook.com/Samuel Stokes Music is where you can find the memes. Or you can go to my website, SamuelStokesMusic.com. Have a good day.